Today's offertory words are, I love atheists because they choose to do good, not out of fear of hell, but because it is the right thing to do. I still remember the last time humans didn't care about facts or evidence. It was called the Dark Ages for a reason. Signed, God. All right. All right. Today our guest speaker is Christo Chaney from the Jewish Synagogue Congregation in Sha'aret, Israel, here in Lubbock. And as our little artwork that was up here, Christo likes to remind people that he is not a rabbi and is not purporting to be a rabbi, but is a lay leader and leads services at his congregation. The liturgy is beautiful. If you haven't had an interfaith experience like that, I encourage going over and visiting the congregation there. His message today is not about abortion. It is made in the divine image, same-sex attraction, and Judaism. So please join me in welcoming Christo to the pulpit.
I'm very surprised this topic was not mentioned sooner, just so that all of you are aware. These slides were made a little over a year and a half ago, and I've been waiting so patiently for someone to ask me to do this, and someone finally did.
You need to speak out more, dear, earlier.
I'd rather that you give me a subject to speak on, because I don't want to talk about a subject y'all don't want to hear, because it may be a topic I may not be familiar with, and it gives me an opportunity to research it for you. So I'd rather that you suggested, even though I wasn't too thrilled with the abortion subjects, nor the Israeli and Palestinian issue.
But this one's good.
But you wouldn't let me speak on another topic until those two were given. I'm going to start off by explaining very briefly the four main movements of Judaism. Almost everyone, when they hear about Judaism, they're most often thinking about Orthodox, the one with the black hats, the shtreimels, the side-curl payos, and all those, and their talits, black stripes only. It's the smallest movement in the United States, and Canada is Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Around 10% of American Jews are Orthodox, a little bit less, a little bit more. There is a little bit of acceptance within Orthodox Judaism of LGBT plus people. There's not much, but there is a little bit, and they are slowly gaining progress within Orthodoxy. It's really slow. The next movement of Judaism I'll briefly explain is called conservative Judaism, and I want to be very clear. Conservative Judaism does not mean politically conservative. Outside of the United States and Canada, the movement is known as Masorti, which is the Hebrew word means traditional. The local synagogue here, where I lead services from time to time, is part of the Union for Reform Judaism. We are the largest movement of Judaism in the United States and Canada. We're the smallest movement in Israel for now.
Yeah.
Get back in 15 or so years, and we'll see where we're at then. And finally, the fourth main movement is called Reconstructionist Judaism. It's a movement I'm not too familiar with. I do like some of their liturgy and some of their sermons they put out. It broke off from the conservative movement, 60s, late 50s, or sometime in the 60s. The further down this list you go, the more accepting the movement will be towards LGBT plus people. Every year, I come out with a design for Pride to put on a shirt to get a message across very, very clearly. This was the first design I put out for Lubbock Pride, and I made a mistake of putting it on a black shirt in the middle of summer in Lubbock. Every shirt after this one will be white. It keeps me from getting overheated way too easily. Love is kosher. Make that extremely clear. That was my message in 2000. That was 2018 and 2019. Hey, Josh, remember that?
Yeah.
And that's about the time when Josh Salmons started asking me if I would ever speak here at the UU on topics from a Jewish viewpoint. That's kind of where that discussion started. This is last year's design. I designed it originally for 2020, but COVID interrupted me, I'll put it that way. And this topic, Made in the Divine Image, was actually Josh's idea because he remembered this design from last year and said, could this be the topic of your next message at the UU? I said, one word to him. Duh. It's based on Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. B'Tselem Elohim bara. It does not matter what your religious beliefs are, what your political affiliation is, nothing. Every single person, even you atheists out there, you are all made in the divine image. All are equal. No one is greater or less than any other. All too often, including the protesters that interrupted our private celebration yesterday, they had a clear message of their own. They often start out with these two verses from Leviticus 18:22 and chapter 20, verse 13. However, there, if you can see the Hebrew well enough, I put one word in brackets. Even the Jewish Publication Society's translation is wrong. It's not being as clear as the Hebrew is leading us to think. That Hebrew word, mishkeve, is referring to a very specific sexual act. And I'll paraphrase what it is in a little bit. But oftentimes, when so many people, and some of them are Orthodox Jews, calm down, Christo, calm down. They start out with those two verses. Well, the Torah says. Is that what it means, or is your translation accurate? It might be wrong, because my translation of parts of the Bible I've done are wrong. Maybe their translation's wrong too. But for everyone that keeps wanting to throw out those two verses from Leviticus, why aren't they skipping over this one, right in the middle? Leviticus 19, verse 18. Lo tikum velo titor et b'nei amecha, ve'ahavta lorecha kamocha, ani Adonai. One Jewish philosopher, I can't remember his name, it might have been Martin Buber. He said, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself, because your neighbor is so much like yourself. Your neighbor has the same needs, the same desires, the same hopes, the same dreams. You are much more like your neighbor than you may think. And who is your neighbor? Most of rabbinic Judaism is very insistent. Your neighbor is every single human being. Who else saw me at Pride yesterday? Some of y'all did? So y'all know what my design was yesterday, don't you? That was my message. Not only to those who support us and accept us, it's also as clear as possible as I can be. To the people who don't want us to even exist. Hold on one moment, everybody. I need to make a small adjustment here. What do y'all think, instead, if I just continue on with my shirt design from yesterday? That be all right with everybody?
Oh, yeah.
Well, not dressed up a little bit nicer, but your AC works fine. But I know that here being a little more laid back is more acceptable.
I didn't know this was this kind of service.
Josh, there's no pole in here. Every one of us is so many feet and inches in height. Every one of us weighs so many pounds and ounces. Some of us weigh more, some weigh less. I'm trying to weigh less. Some of us have more of a waistline than others. I'm trying to get my waistline down. But because you all have a certain amount of height, of feet and inches, a certain number of weight in pounds and ounces, not only are you matter, but you do matter. One of the most well-known sages of all Judaism had taught in the Mishnah in Pirkey Avot, chapter 2. Al tifrosh min hatzibor. Hillel taught, do not isolate yourself from the community. Yesterday, all these people, a lot of them were straight allies, and a lot of Christians and a few churches here locally opposed the violent-ish protesters and responded with their Christian. And some atheists joined with some Christians and me with their message saying, we choose love. And I was relieved that some of the protesters, were they arrested? Were they escorted out?
They were escorted out.
Escorted at least. I've heard a rumor, one or two of them might have been arrested.
I don't know about that.
I'm not going to complain.
They were escorted.
That is why everyone needs a community. It does not matter if it's an atheist community, a religious one, or political affiliation. You need a community to support you, and you need to be part of the community to help others who are vulnerable. I will guarantee you, every one of you Unitarian Universalists, you are doing so much more good here in not only Lubbock, but because you're putting these things out on Facebook Live, you have no idea how much help you are giving to others that you may never even know about. You could well be saving some people's lives and not even know it. So let's get into the Bible. The Jewish Study Bible, first and second editions from Oxford University Press, explains a little bit about Leviticus. It says that biblical and ancient Near Eastern culture was not familiar with homosexuality in the sense of a defined sexual orientation or a lifestyle. I do disagree with the Jewish Study Bible on one thing, where it says, according to the biblical evidence, David and Jonathan had no sexual relationship. I disagree with the Jewish Study Bible on that, and you're about to find out why in a moment. But see what it says there that I've underlined. It acknowledges only the occasional act of, I need to paraphrase this, one male forcibly penetrating another male. I'm not going to say that word up here. It's 4 letters. It was usually as an act of force associated with public humiliation, revenge, and subjugation. For the biblical examples, you can find that in Genesis 19. Sorry, Sodom and Gomorrah was not about same-sex attraction. It was about violence and harming vulnerable strangers that needed your help. The Jerusalem Talmud explains that Sodom and Gomorrah were so depraved that they passed civil laws forbidding people from helping the poor and the needy. Maybe that's why God really destroyed the 2 cities. It's not because 2 men or 2 women loved each other. I'm not going to go over the entire story of David and Jonathan, but it's found mostly in 1 Samuel and a little bit in 2 Samuel. I'll let y'all look that up at your own leisure. But in 1 Samuel 18, it says, when David finished speaking with Saul, Saul was Israel's first king. Jonathan, this is Saul's son, his soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. Saul took him, meaning David, into his service that very day and would not let David return to his father's house. So David lived with Saul and Jonathan. Jonathan and David made a pact. The Hebrew word is berit, which normally means covenant, and a covenant is not to be broken as long as the 2 parties are alive. Because Jonathan loved David as himself. Look here in the blue bar. Jonathan took off the cloak and the tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, his bow, and his belt. Here's my question. What was Jonathan left wearing standing in front of David when he gave him all that? In the next chapter, we don't know how much time has passed since this, but Jonathan's father, King Saul, urged his son and his courtiers to murder David. But Saul's son Jonathan was very fond. I think the JPS is kind of toning the language down a bit from the Hebrew. There's the Hebrew word right there. I'll explain it on the next time, just a moment. But Jonathan warns David what his father plans on doing, and he develops a creative scenario to figure out if Saul's really going to murder David or spare David's life. Saul saved David's life by putting his own life at risk. At the very end of that episode, Saul, the king, the top dude in Israel, accepted his son's pleas, and he promised, as the eternal one lives, he shall not be put to death. And since God cannot die, David would never be put to death. Here is that Hebrew word, hafetz. It means to delight in, take pleasure in, to desire, be pleased with. I'll let you draw your own conclusions of that, on what that probably means. Think about it for a while and get back to me what you think. I'll be listening, I promise. I think it was so much more than simply a friendship, more than simply a non-physical attraction between the two of them. It seems a whole lot deeper than that. And you know what? I didn't write the Hebrew scriptures. The ancient scribes did. Take it up with the ancient scribes. And sometime later, Saul flew into a rage against Jonathan, and he screamed, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, I know that you side with the son of Jesse. To your shame and to the shame of your mother's ervat." The Hebrew word ervat always refers to some kind of a sexual activity or nudity. Now, what that activity was, we're not told. Because it kind of doesn't matter to me what exactly Jonathan and David may have been doing. That would be between them and what my great-grandparents just called the boss upstairs. Jonathan concocted another scheme to try to save David's life, but it did not succeed. The last time that David and Jonathan saw each other, they were holding each other, kissing each other, bawling. One of them crying more than the other. They would never see each other again. And sometime later, Jonathan tragically died on the battlefield with his father. And when David learned of this, in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26, he said, "Sar li alecha achi Yehonatan. Na'amta li me'od nifleata ahavacha li." Whoa, check the purple. Me'ahavat nashim. You were most dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me, more than the love of women. King David did marry a woman. He had children with her. There's no evidence anywhere in the scriptures themselves where David ever said to his wife that he loved her. The only evidence we have from the Bible alone of David professing his love for someone was to another man. Jonathan had a son before Jonathan died. We don't know what this little boy's disability was, but he could not take care of himself. David, when he became king over all of Israel, he took care of this child's needs, and he would even feed this child first before he allowed himself to be served. And when this little child died, Jonathan's son, David took care of all his funeral expenses and grieved for Jonathan's son as if the son was David's own, fulfilling his promise he made to Jonathan when Jonathan was still alive. Generations after the Davidic monarchy came to an end, there was an enigmatic sage known as Ezekiel. David's capital was in a city called Jerusalem. I was there last year. It'll be good to be back later this year. But Ezekiel is relaying the words of the eternal God to Jerusalem for all their wrongs. sister Sodom and her daughters did not do what you and your daughters have done. Speaking to personifying Jerusalem as a woman. Only this was the sin of your sister Sodom. If a Bible translates the Hebrew word ga'on as pride, that translation is wrong. Ezekiel used the word ga'on, which means arrogance. Pride in Hebrew is ga'ava, very different. Sodom and her daughters had plenty of food and untroubled tranquility, yet they did not help the poor and the needy. In their haughtiness, they committed, here's the word, abomination against me. And God removed them as you saw, nor did Samaria commit even half of your sins. You committed more abominations than they, and by all these abominations you committed, you made your sisters look righteous by comparison. But after God is done shooting out Jerusalem, God then informs Jerusalem, your sister Sodom and her daughters shall be restored to their former state, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former state. And you and your daughters shall be returned to your former state. God is not a God of eternal punishment. God wants repair. I've often thought of God as a loving parent. And let me ask you this. For those that think that God sends people to hell for the wrong beliefs, the wrong religions, for eternity, what parent punishes their child without end for a brief moment of transgression? That could never be a loving parent. In the Mishnah, Tractate Sanhedrin, chapter 4, whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if they destroyed an entire world. The next statement in Sanhedrin 4 says, whoever saves a human life is credited by God as if you saved an entire world. I have no idea how many lives you Unitarian Universalists have saved. But think about each one being an entire world, and you have no idea how many worlds God is crediting you with saving. Even those of you who are atheists and agnostics. I think God is more pleased with agnostics and atheists than he is with some religious folks, like the ones that tried to tell some of us to go kill ourselves yesterday. How pro-life of them, right? I know that most of you are, a lot of you here are atheists and agnostics. Earlier this morning, before I came over here, I took some time to think about this community. I said, what could be an appropriate response to the God I worship every day? This morning, I said, this here is in the plural. So you can adapt it if you'd like, however you want to. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu chavarim tovim ba'ahava. Praise is the Eternal One, who has given us all good friends in love. I'm going to finish off with a few books from my library. These are some recommended resources that you can refer LGBT people to, both Jews and non-Jews. The first one is one of my favorite books. It's called Wrestling with God and Men, Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition. Rabbi Stephen Greenberg was ordained by the Orthodox Union and was a member, I think he was a member of the Rabbinical Council of America. When he wrote this book, he came out of the closet as a gay man. In that book, he quotes only Orthodox sources. He does not quote Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, Masorti, they're all Orthodox sources that he cites in his book, and he makes a very good case that his former colleagues cannot prove him wrong on why LGBT people have a place in Orthodox Judaism and all other movements. The other book I recommend to everyone is called Torah Queries. It mostly goes over just the 5 books of Moses. Every one of these commentary entries are written by either an LGBT plus Jew, some are trans, some are bi, some are lesbian, but some are also written by straight allies, providing a case on why we deserve to exist without harm, without persecution, and why we are all deserving of acceptance. And some of those can also be referred to non-Jews also in your non-Jewish communities as well. And finally, I got this book recently. It's called Mishkan Ga'ava. The Reformed prayer book I use at home. It's called Mishkan Tefillah, Tabernacle of Prayer. This is a supplement to it. And Mishkan Ga'ava means where pride dwells. It has a lot of supplemental material for LGBT plus Jews to use. And I'm pretty sure that Unitarian Universalists can find some helpful information from it. And maybe you can adapt some of it for future pride celebrations to an agnostic and atheist audience here next year sometime. So everyone, I didn't go over time, I'm surprised. I'm surprised I didn't go over time, normally I do. So everyone, it is my requirement here that I invite people from this community to ask me questions if you have any. Because I've taken the time to speak to you, it is my turn to listen to what you have to say.
Does Hillel or Shammai address any of these topics in their writings?
Hillel and Shammai, they lived a little bit before the Common Era. There is a couple of things, it is in the Talmud, about two men sharing a bed. If two men are found sharing a bed, even though during that time it was punishable by death, if somebody catches them, they are to assume that nothing is happening. Now, I don't know where that is in the Talmud exactly. I can find that for you and let you know exactly where it is in the Talmud.
I addressed that question because that's mostly from the time of the foundation.
We need the microphone.
He can't.
A lot of it was.
Can't hear him.
Marty, we need the microphone.
I'm done.
Marty's done. Maybe repeat the question.
The question was, does Hillel and Shammai, they were the two greatest sages from before the Mishnaic period, ever address homosexuality? Not really, because they did not know of it as a concept. They only knew about certain sexual acts between two men. So that's why one of the rabbinic decisions is, if two men are found in a bed, even though the Tanakh says certain sexual activity between two men are punishable by death, the rabbinic sages tell everyone, you are to assume nothing is going on. And they left it at that.
Are there other LGBTQ identities, examples from Jewish scripture or literature?
From Jewish texts, there probably is. There's nothing about female homosexuality in the Bible.
I was going to ask that.
Rabbinic text does mention two women. I'm not going to say what those actions are here. That's going to make me blush red. It basically said it discouraged female homosexual activity. It's simply saying they kind of said it is not appropriate, but they never instituted any death penalty or harming. It was simply a rabbinic restriction that they added onto Jewish texts later on, long after the Jewish Bible was finished.
When you say rabbinic text, is that isolated to rabbinic
Mishnah,
practice?
Talmud, yeah, anything after the Jewish Bible is rabbinic text.
You seem to have studied Judaism quite a bit. And I was wondering, just curious, if you were born into Judaism or you chose Judaism based on the results of your studies.
If you read my first and second articles on reformjudaism.org, my bio says that I converted to Judaism on Sunday, July 30th, 2017, the day after I turned 34.
Okay, I think it would be a great, and maybe another discussion as to what are some of the reasons why you converted. That would be fascinating.
One reason, the list list of reasons are very long. It would fill up an entire book. So simply put, I am a survivor of suicide. A Jewish chaplain, his name is Rabbi Sidney Zimmelman. He came to check on me when I was in the hospital. I was strapped to a hospital bed. He gave me a book to read. He said, see if this helps you. If it doesn't, I'll apologize. If it doesn't help you, you can return it. If it helps you, you can keep it. That book was written by Dr. Alan Marinas. It is called Climbing Jacob's Ladder. I read that book in one sitting all the way through. Right before I got to the conclusion of the book, I canceled my next suicide plan. You never know what small act of kindness can keep somebody alive or possibly prevent them from attempting another suicide attempt. And I still have that book at home. I tried to return the book to him after I was released from the hospital. He said, well, the book helped, didn't it? I said, yes, sir, it did. I said, oh, then keep it. Keep using it. And he invited me to stay for services in his synagogue. And then he gave me one of the traditional prayer books that they use. And I still have that siddur he gave me to this very day. So if you ever get this message, Rabbi Zimmerman, Christo Chaney is better. LGBT. Life gets better together.
Any other questions? One thing I was curious about, because you describe God as kind of like a loving parent, how do you see, especially from an LGBTQ and being a member of the LGBTQ, when you look at the scriptures, you've kind of provided that that perspective already to a degree, but how do you view God outside of maybe, do you see it beyond like a reward and punishment system? That I guess that's the part that usually some of us atheists kind of get hung up on, is the reward punishment system that's already like in the first part of like the typical scripture given. And you've already kind of described how that doesn't necessarily apply the way they think it applies. But there's still that for a lot of atheists and agnostics, that we have that problem with this divine being with a punishment and reward system that is...
Josh, a lot of people that believe in God have the same struggles you do. They're struggling with it also. Really, describing God as a loving parent is the best way that I can. How do you really describe some, I don't want to say individual, but someone, some individual, some being that exists outside of space and time that science cannot prove either way? Science cannot disprove God exists, but science cannot prove it either. And so this is the only thing I could really, and you and I have had a lot of discussions over this at J&D's, over coffee, and in some restaurants. I simply asked, I said, Josh, what loving parent punishes a child without end for a short moment of disobeying? So many people that think of God as giving rewards and punishments, they're looking at it from a very, very different lens. So many times they're looking at the scriptures from a translation. I know for a fact, because not only do I know English and Hebrew, I still know some American Sign Language. There are some things in various languages that you cannot translate completely from one language into another, especially into a language like English, which is changing so much so fast.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like me because I tell them this. The Bible, and when I say the Bible, I mean the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. It is a product of its time, and its place, and its locations and languages. It is basically how God was communicating to people in a way they could understand then.
Right.
The Christian scriptures in Greek were written in Greek because that was the most well-known language of the time.
Yeah.
The centuries and decades of the New Testament era was so different from the generations of the Tanakh that came before it. The Mishnah is a product of its time. Both Talmuds, they are products of their time. Our Declaration of Independence in the U.S., it is a product of its time. Constitution. There's 27 amendments in it. It's been updated. They're products of their time. Anything that I say is a product of its time. What I'm saying here today, what you respond to me with, the world will be very different within 5 years from now. It does not mean the scriptures are wrong. It's simply, this is why I tell everyone, I will help you learn the Hebrew language if you want to. If you want to know what the text really says in the source languages, I'll help you learn it. No strings attached. Well, other than these, maybe. No strings attached, and trust me, I've translated different parts of the Tanakh from Hebrew to English, and I keep going back and I keep finding out that even my translation is wrong too. So if you can come up with a better translation from the Hebrew into English, let me know. I'd like to learn how you understand it. Maybe you'll be correcting me someday. Right. So it's just about a minute before noon, so Josh, I need you to get back up here and close us out, please. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness strength, may all your joys only increase. And I'm adding in here, Chodesh Ga'ava Samech. May you all have a very happy month of pride. Ga'ava, not Ga'on.
Thank you, Christo, not a rabbi.
But wise nonetheless.
Wise and could have fooled me at the outset there. So, all right. Where am I at? Oh. All right. Thank you very much, Christo. That was a very meaningful discussion and gave us a broader perspective of Jewish literature and scripture concerning LGBTQ identities and people. So our closing words are by unknown, the unknown. Author unknown. Pride didn't come about for a need to celebrate being LGBTQ+, but for the right to exist without being persecuted. So instead of wondering why there isn't straight pride, be grateful it's never going to be needed.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Would someone care to lead, carry the flame?
We'll stand up.
All right.
Sarah will lead it.
Carry
The flame of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.
Thank you very much. Go in peace.